You're listening to Paris Talks Marketing. My goal with this podcast is to dig deeper into digital marketing success than any other marketing podcast out there, to reveal the growth marketing strategies and tactics that are working today, empowering growth at amazing companies and organizations. Keep listening as I interview founders, CEOs, and marketing leaders from all around the world, primarily from companies in the tech and software as a service industries. Now, on with the episode. Hi, everybody. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Russ Somers, who is the VP of Marketing at TrustRadius. And as the leader of the TrustRadius marketing team, Russ balances a data-driven approach with narrative instincts honed by years as a songwriter and performer. He's built the marketing engine and framework that's taken high-growth startups like TrendKite and Invodo to successful exits. And he started his marketing career with Fortune 500 companies, including Dell and Sabre Holdings. Russ spends his spare time with his family, as well as collecting guitars, writing songs, and recording. Russ, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Paris. It is great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And outside of that very colorful intro, is there anything else that you'd like to add to introduce yourself to our audience?
No, it's just, good to be here. I think the core thing to think about is that why I'm at TrustRadius is this whole concept of truth and trust. And so that blends into, since I love to tell stories, that really blends well the stories customers tell about products and taking those to market.
Yeah. One of the things that jumped out at me immediately when I went to connect with you on LinkedIn is your title, or your, I don't know what if LinkedIn calls that, the title or your headline, which is Bringing Truth to Market as VP of Marketing at TrustRadius. What does that mean, bringing truth to market?
What's interesting is that marketers, there's people say sometimes that marketers lie almost as much as lawyers do, right? I mean, they go, that's not the truth. That's just marketing or whatever. And the interesting thing that I've been seeing in my time here and even before is buyers are getting really, really skeptical of that, especially B2B buyers. They know it's a song and dance. They know it's a demo. They know it's a lot of promises a product may or may not live up to. And so TrustRadius, we've got the opportunity here to help buyers by actually understanding the truth about products, by understanding what works for others like them, as well as to help vendors sell in, frankly, a more honest way and really connect with their customers in the way the customers want to.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I have to ask this question, and I'm sure I'm not the first one to ask you this question. You are in a very competitive space. The big names here are Capterra and G2. Mm-hmm. How do you differentiate, and how are you going to beat those guys?
What a good question. Obviously, you always beat people at your game, not their game, right? Uh-huh. But when we think about it, all of the sites in the space do something somewhat different. Capterra is very strong for lead arbitrage, or basically buy-in pay-per-click leads from Capterra. G2, big search presence, very diffuse audience, everything from mom and pops to large enterprises with a lot of SMB and mid-market. We differentiate based on quality and trust. Our reviews are the longest in the industry, averaging 408 words versus an average of 80 words perhaps for G2 or Capterra. And we have a really strong validation and vetting process behind them. So where many other sites essentially have reviews as SEO bait, which is fine, we play that game too, we have reviews that are deep enough that they're actually helpful, and that shows up in the engagement. A visitor to our site looking at a category page and comparing software, they spend an average of 11 minutes on that page. Some pages have time on page of 20, 30 minutes, which in the web world is just insane. And that tells me that people are actually getting value from the deep content. Mm-hmm.
So there is no pay to play here, right? There's no pay to rank or pay for priority or any sort of advantage over a competitor, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely true. We do offer services to the vendors to use that content to power conversion, to use intent data for targeting. There's a lot of great services we do offer vendors, but letting them buy a better spot is not one of them.
Okay. So is the primary monetization here the intent data that's that you sell to vendors?
Intent data is a big reason that people buy, but it's not just that. There's the intent data, license to use the content, tools to use the content, like dynamically syndicating the exact right quote to a landing page, tools to put the content and the accounts at people's fingertips in Salesforce or even in Chrome. So there's a lot of things beyond just intent, and we do sell as an overall packaged offering.
Okay, gotcha. One thing that I found interesting in my research here was that when you suggest product comparisons, so if I'm in the CRM category and I go in and search for a brand name, at some point you will say that these are popular comparisons. For example, Pipedrive is often compared to Salesforce or to HubSpot. And I read in the description of basically your entire philosophy and approach to trust is that you're using actually search data as part of that the determination of how you're going to compare products. Can you tell me a little bit about how that works? Are you actually doing keyword research to determine what products should be compared to others?
Well, a lot of it is what is data, proprietary data from the site itself. We've got
Mm-hmm.
1.2 million visitors a month, so their interactions mean a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
we're parsing out on the site exactly what you say, the search data, so we understand that when people run a comparison with Salesforce, maybe 60% of the time it includes Pipedrive. I'm making that up. It probably doesn't. But the point being, we're taking that actual data. So it's not a merchandising, if you like this product, you might also like this product. It is much more of an honest, true, these are the products that customers are comparing. And it's interesting
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes vendors don't agree. They'll say, that's not our competitor. And it's like, great. But the fact is, buyers are comparing you to this other product. So you should consider it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So I'd like to dig a little deeper. You mentioned a 1.2 million, 1.2 million a month. Is that your overall traffic?
That's overall site traffic
Overall
across about
site traffic?
five. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that that's scaled in a relatively short period of time from a much lower number. Can you talk about how that happened? I mean, how you were able to grow the site traffic so exponentially fast in a relatively short period?
Yeah, it's a good question. Part of it, of course, it's an emerging and nascent space, right? So
Mm-hmm.
traffic for searches for, Salesforce reviews, Marketo reviews, things like that are rising anyway because it's how people buy now. So there's certainly a rising tide. But
Mm-hmm.
when I started, and this was years ago when the company was younger and smaller, we didn't have a massive traffic number. We had a few 100,000 visitors a month. And over the past couple of years, we've invested heavily in SEO. We've brought in a stellar leader for that team and built out a very powerful SEO team. And we focus very much on what actual buyers are searching for. So volume plays a part, certainly. But we also look at what search terms are actually of the most use to those buyers. And that's the traffic we're out there working every day to acquire. There's sort of a three-legged stool to make it happen of technical excellence on all our pages, so technical SEO. There is
Mm-hmm.
the content, the user generated and editorial content, making sure that's great content and easy for Google to crawl and see. And then the link generation through PR of ensuring that our name, our brand, our reviews are out there and getting
Mm-hmm.
tons of links back. And those three
Gotcha.
things together are what drive it.
Yep. That is more or less the formula for success with SEO, as far as I understand it. Uh, a great, strong technical foundation that allows Google to easily crawl, access, and understand the content, and high quality content, and an ongoing development of high quality content and freshness, and then the links, of course. I did a bit of research, and I don't know if what I'm seeing is correct because it's a third party tool, Ahrefs. You might be familiar with it.
I am indeed.
And I saw that over the last, well, let's say the last maybe year and 3-4 months. I'm looking at a period that probably starts around November of 2019. What I'm seeing is a graph that looks like there was an amazing run up in organic search traffic, and it peaked sometime around the, I'd say, October or November timeframe of last year, 2020, and then it fell. So it peaked at around October, and then it fell, and then it's been a pretty steep decline. So I think there was a significant chunk of organic traffic that was handed back, I guess.
Yes.
Now this is simply just from a third party tool, but is that actually the case?
Yes, you will see if you track us and competitors. There have been some changes from Google algorithms, from other things. We've made changes to the page templates, of course, which drove a lot of the initial growth. But if you look at what's happening in the space, a few things are happening. First off, as algo changes, such as a recent one hit, we all sort of surf and try to find our equilibrium there, us and the competitive set. And the other thing is, as people more and more search for things like, again, Marketo review or whatever it might be, as people seek out reviews, some of that traffic becomes a zero-sum game between us and competitors. So it's one of those things that with SEO, you're always playing the long game. It's great when you do have a strong run up and a really strong surge in traffic, but you have to think over the long haul of, are we really creating value for searchers? And if you do that, you'll have some ups, you'll have some downs, but you'll, in the long run, come out on top.
Right. And is your particular approach and then the approach of the SEO team not purely traffic for the sake of traffic, but the highly engaged traffic, the traffic that has the low bounce rate and the high time on page? As you said, 11 minutes, which is a phenomenal average for those product pages. Is that more of the approach? Is just to try to focus on quality of traffic a little more so than just pure volume?
Exactly so, because when you think of it, quality of traffic is a proxy for quality of audience. So you can create kind of junk content around trending topics that brings people to read one blog post and click away. And some of our competitors have played with strategies like that. And it's a fine strategy for rapid traffic building. But what we really want to do, we are a buyer first site, so we want to be of use to the buyers. So if we're bringing people and they're bouncing or not engaging, that's plainly the wrong traffic. And the reason that works in our favor is, let's imagine that you are a vendor and you sell CRM software. You care less about being seen by 10,000 people that are looking just very superficially. The people that are actually in market, which tends to be people that are comparing products head to head, reading reviews, things like that. That's the audience you want. So an engaged audience is much more valuable to vendors and lets us provide a lot more value to buyers.
Russ, can you describe to me in your best understanding of a typical SaaS buyer's journey? And I know it's going to be different by category, but some higher price categories are going to be longer. But can you describe to me what you all imagine a typical SaaS buyer journey to be, from the initial point of awareness of a need? That means they're actually becoming an in-market, entering that in-market audience space, to the point that they pull the trigger on something. And where do the visits and interaction with TrustRadius normally fall in that journey?
That's a super good question. We actually have an in-house research team that's done a lot of work on this, and we have a content piece. I think it's called the Software Buying Map, that's actually on the site, that details everything they've found. But it starts, just like you said, Paris, it starts with epiphany. Epiphany isn't, I need to buy a product. Epiphany is, I have a problem and there might be a way to solve it. So people go from that awareness of the problem to understanding how other people are solving that problem, which they do, of course, through searching, through talking to peers, etc. We always want to know what our peers are doing to solve a problem. People assemble a short list, and then ultimately make a decision. But a few things are really interesting about that journey these days. One is it's very much buying as a team sport. It is very rare that it is one person. So the average buying committee is, I believe, 4 to 5. You see buying committees as large as 9 or 10 and as small as 2 or 3, but it's usually a team sport. The other thing that's changed is 60% last year of major software purchase decisions were made by millennials. So it is a new generation in control. And if we think of millennials eating avocado toast, let's remember they're now at midlife. They have kids, they have mortgages, and they're the majority of buyers now, and they make decisions differently. They care about what their peers think, and they're very collaborative in how they work. So it's still the same process, but more people are involved, and it's more collaborative than it used to be.
Mm-hmm. That's a great insight, the millennial buying mindset is quite different, because I believe, for most of their adult lives, they've always had the internet at their fingertips, and they've always built their concept of trust around the community, because there was always a community that was documented there for them, also at their fingertips. That's reviews, and it's other things too. But it's that level of transparency that I guess for us in our generation, we didn't really have access to that kind of information. We would have to trust what maybe a salesperson in a store would tell us, that, yeah, trust me, that, this is our most popular selling guitar. And based on what you're telling me, this is the right one for you. And it's so different now. I mean, we are right now delivering a webinar series about this marketing framework called the messy middle, which is saying that and in particular for SaaS businesses, that the path to purchase is no longer a predictable straight line or a linear path down a funnel, but it's a convoluted mess, really. And so more than ever, you just have to really be there and omnipresent at all these possible touch points when people are going to come in, because they're in control. They're going to decide how and where to toggle and jump around review sites and branded pages, and there's going to be paid touch points and non-paid touch points, and category non-branded keywords and branded keywords. You first of all have to be there all the time, and then there's these tactics or these so-called cognitive biases that you can use to eventually get people that are in this loop that can be endless of exploration, evaluation, where they're expanding their decision set, and then they're narrowing the decision set, and then they might do it again and again. To pull them out of that loop with these cognitive biases, those are things like social proof, absolutely relevant here, authority bias, category heuristics, where you can just line up side by side. I want to see feature by feature, who's got the features I care about, who doesn't, and at what price points. And even other things that are sometimes highly emotional, like the power of some free offer, or some kind of implication of limited time or limited availability. This is only going to last until end of the week, or there's only 5 of these left. And I'm wondering, of those types of these cognitive biases, which of those do you think are most powerfully represented on TrustRadius, and which do you feel might be overrated?
That's a really good question. And I don't know that I can hit on all of them, but several are certainly represented. Obviously, social proof. Again, as I said, buying is now a team sport, and social proof is used throughout the process. Should I even consider this product? Should I keep it on my short list? Should I take a demo with them? Social proof influences all of that. So that piece, certainly. A couple others that you mentioned are super interesting. Trying to remember which ones you mentioned. Social proof, and then there was one right after that. Trying to remember what it was.
Authority bias?
Authority bias, thank you. And that's why if you look like on any review site, and certainly on ours, you will have the profile of the person who wrote the review. And some review sites are 100% anonymous in terms of presenting that. They only say, marketing manager at a 1,000-person company in the construction industry. Whenever possible, about 70% of ours people have chosen to show their public, show who they are in the review. And so you can see this is Susie Smith, and she's CMO at Megacorp. And so that lends to authority bias. So I would see those two as being very well represented and things that TrustRadius helps a lot with.
Mm-hmm.
Others, I guess it's interesting when you say, are there any that I think are blown out of proportion or are, not as impactful, almost by definition of the fact that if it's a cognitive bias, even if it's untrue, if it changes how people make decisions, we have to acknowledge that it's a real one. So I don't know that there's one I'd call out and say there's ones we may not help with quite as much as others, but I don't know that I would say, hey, your confirmation bias is just wrong. The fact is, even if it's not a great way to think, confirmation bias influences how you think and is therefore valid.
Right. Good point. And the studies themselves have shown that these are simply mental shortcuts. And
Mm-hmm.
at some point, these are levers that people pull because at some point they realize, okay, I still need to get, I need to go to my committee at the end of this week and make a recommendation. So at some point I've got to make a decision and I need a mental shortcut.
Isn't it interesting how often with those things, someone else recommended it becomes that mental shortcut? Who else do you know that has done this? It's just de-risking. We're considering this software platform. Who else do we know that's used it? Well, our friend Joan used it, and well, did it work for Joan? She got great results. We know Joan probably did due diligence, so her due diligence transfers to us is kind of what happens, and that's
Right.
how the trust is transferred.
Yeah. Have you heard this expression? No one ever got fired for hiring IBM.
I know that one well.
I guess it's a popular one. Yeah. I still think to some extent it depends on who the decision maker is. But if the stakes are high for that decision maker, sometimes there's just job security at play. Even maybe I don't want to go out on a limb, and I think that this might be the best software. And it's the most innovative. It might be a little less stable than the others, but they're really innovating and they're really breaking barriers. But I don't know. I might want to default a little bit on the safer option here, and that's supported by a larger number of reviews, because maybe I don't want to get the blame if actually this thing that I recommend turns out to go buggy or to crash or something.
Well, we understand that loss aversion is more powerful than gain, right? People are more afraid of losing something than of gaining. That's a basic cognitive distortion. So per your point, yeah, they're de-risking it. They're saying, at least I know I haven't made a bad decision. And avoidance of a bad decision is sometimes more powerful than seeking a good decision.
Yeah. And in TrustRadius's approach to its unbiased rankings, do you take the authority of the reviewer into account?
We do. We actually have as much as we can. We don't yet have sort of page rank for reviewers, as it were, although that would be a pretty cool thing. And it's
that certainly would.
That certainly we've thought about. What we do, though, is we look at the channel as a proxy for that. Did this come in as a paid reviewer following an incentive? Did this come in as an organic review? Was this solicited by the vendor? And do we know that the vendor is being unbiased and reaching out to all their buyers? That all feeds an algorithm we call TR score that evaluates how trusted a given review is in terms of how much it should count for the ranking. So it's
very interesting.
It's pretty good at controlling out bias and gaming by the vendors. The other fun thing we launched a year ago was a program called TRUE, which stands for transparent, responsive, unbiased, and ethical. And you can think of it as GMO-free for reviews. A vendor that is certified TRUE means they've certified with us that there's no gaming, there's no funny stuff, and you can trust them to actually be asking all their customers for reviews.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, an unsolicited review that requires that added motivation from the reviewer because they're so delighted. I think that's certainly worth more, regardless of the size of company the person's coming from. A great experience is a great experience.
Yeah, and when somebody legitimately steps up. The other thing we've found that's counterintuitive, that's fun here, Paris, is if you think about it, a reviewer that's not driven by incentive is likely either really happy or really upset. So you get twos, threes, nines, and tens. That's one of the reasons why we do recommend using incentives and reaching out to all customers to get a balanced sample, because what we find is when you do that, you get a lot more, five, sixes, and sevens in the middle. So you get a truer, by using the right incentives and reaching out to your community the right way, you get a truer representation of actual product sentiment.
Right. You have to smooth out the middle section between the outliers, I suppose. I mean, you actually have to
Yeah.
shape that bell curve. Yeah,
Mhm.
with some solicited reviews. People that are, probably either slightly dissatisfied, slightly satisfied, and in the middle. But that's going to be the volume, and you need to. I think you need to get that in to truly represent the overall satisfaction, the bell curve.
Couldn't agree more. And that also allows people to find reviewers like them, because it's really interesting the searching behavior we see, because people use reviews throughout the process. But when they're down in the short list, making their final choice, they spend a lot of time looking for reviewers like them. I want to see somebody from my industry, a company about the size of mine, a title similar to mine. And that helps people feel really comfortable with the decision.
Yeah. I have a personal story here because I was recently scanning a category called employee advocacy software. So this is mostly to help companies leverage their employees to help them share content and support their social media and employer branding activities. And I do have to admit, I was on G2 and there were so many reviews that it was just overwhelming. So I needed some way to sort that. So I just started scanning titles and just looking for agencies. And I would just hone in on when I saw someone that looked like some sort of an agency like us. And that was also a very, very useful shortcut for me to get a quick sense. And now that actually segues into my next question, which is, do you all have plans to include other professional services, in particular agencies? I mean, should I be thinking as an agency about trying to have a trust review, a
I don't
TrustRadius
have
strategy in the future, as I now have to have a G2 strategy and a clutch strategy?
That's not a direction we're going this quarter, but I will say that nothing is off the table over the long haul. And it's interesting, you mentioned clutch. And, right now, if I were in the position of running an agency, running a services organization, that's where I'd want to be, is on clutch. So plainly, the nice thing is you're plainly attuned enough to the market that at the point that we do go there, you'll know about it and you'll be ready.
Okay, great. Yeah. I usually want to steer our clients. I don't want to ask too much of them, so I want to try to pick a platform and make a bet on it and say, all right, I'm gonna, at this point in time, all of our requests are gonna be going for this platform, and
But
it
here's
needs
a
to be.
stat that might interest you, Paris, because we spend a lot of time
Uh-huh.
surveying buyers and reviewers. And of people that have written one review, the stat I don't know exactly. Of people that have written one review, roughly 60% would be happy to write another one, but only half of them are ever asked. So people worry more about audience burnout than they probably need to. The fact is,
Very
your
interesting.
loyal customer advocates, if they'll write one review, they're generally happy to write another.
Hmm. That's very interesting, and that gives me a lot of hope that I can start bugging my clients again.
Well,
um,
and what you should do with that, for what it's worth, is do it on an ongoing basis. It's not a one and done, number one. And number two, figure out where to embed asks. Software companies will often put an ask for a review on their login screen, right? So, oh, you're
mhm.
here to use 15.5 again. How about you write us a review? Things like that, including it in your newsletter, including it in your email signature. Instead of a few big asks, lots of little asks along the way will ensure a
Yeah.
constant stream.
We did recently introduce an NPS survey for our clients, a monthly NPS survey, and anyone who's going to give us a 7 or above, we then follow up and ask if it's, hey, if you are happy, would you mind hanging around 5 more minutes and giving us a review over here? But this has become such an integral strategy. My next question is really now beyond the review sites. How can the content and the assets that you provide to your customers, the vendors, how should they be using that in their marketing as a whole, starting with their websites, their landing pages, maybe some case studies, but how are people taking the assets from TrustRadius that you give them and then incorporating that and sprinkling that around to their other marketing channels and campaigns?
Good question. The smart ones are doing it pervasively. I'd mentioned, the length of our reviews. The other thing that's really useful to the vendors is for a vendor customer, we can ask custom questions, specific questions designed to pull out your differentiation. So let us say, for example, that Paris, the way you differentiate is with a much higher level of service than your competitors. We can make sure that in the review flow, there's a question specifically about that. So we get lots of customers saying, I went with Paris because the products were similar, but Paris offers a much higher service level. So what that means, the reason I went down that detour for a moment, is the content is tailored to help differentiate you if you do it right. So with that, smart customers pipe it, just like you said, to the website and landing pages. We use a widget for dynamics indication that can pull the specifically tailored quotes that are most likely to fit that context, whether it's on your product page or a specific landing page. You can, in your quote curation and tagging, determine what quotes you want to go to which page, what types of quotes you want on each page. And that increases conversion. On landing pages, it drives conversion 20 to 30%, sometimes more, pretty consistently. So very strong conversion driver there. We see salespeople and marketers using it in sales decks all the time. We see our awards when people win a top rated or a Tech Cares or another award. That's just a fantastic opportunity for a social touch, to put that in your social stream, to use that, to write about that on your blog because you've got a win to trumpet. So they use the content in all those different ways. The other two things we've done is we've piped the intent data aspect of it into Salesforce so that customers can see within Salesforce when their top accounts are in market. And then we've also built out a Chrome extension so the sales team can have those quotes at their fingertips to drop into an email, to drop into a presentation. They can, without leaving their browser, just search for a quote, perhaps about ROI, bring that quote up, click to copy paste and drop it in. So it has a whole lot of uses, and I'm always amazed at the creative ways people use it. I've even seen it on billboards, which is really fun, along Highway 101 in California.
Nice. Yeah. I imagine that a lot of this data, at least when it comes to the intent data, is really powering outbound SDR teams, sales development reps, people that are using sales enablement tools like Outreach and Sales Loft. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? And in particular, I have one challenge, which is that because we did this for a little while, and it didn't work out too well because we couldn't identify who in the company might have been there. I mean, we did get intent data, and we were able to, in most cases, map that to the account, to the company.
Mm-hmm.
But then it was still a needle in a haystack challenge for us. How can SDRs overcome the needle in the haystack problem with intent, with the buyer intent data that you provide them?
It's a good question. One thing that our intent data does that some others do not is it has quite a number of parameters, behavioral, what content are the people looking at? So you can understand not just that they viewed your profile 10 times, but here are the products they compared you to, and here are the specific pages that they looked at and such. So that's one clue, because now we're in detective mode. That's telling us what they care about. Another clue, obviously, is things like geolocation. So let us say that it is, a hit from, give me a really big company. I'll go with Dell in Round Rock, right? Round Rock, Texas. If you know somebody from Dell is looking at you and they're in Round Rock, Texas, that's not terribly helpful. But at this point, so many companies have so many remote employees that you'll find someone at Dell in Rochester, New York, for example, and suddenly that narrows down to a smaller list. So there's that aspect of doing the detective work as a BDR, as an SDR to close it. And the other, frankly, is integration with other tools, as we look at the tools that are super strong in ABM, as we look at, certainly things like 6sense, things like TechTarget. Using those tools in conjunction with our data is a pretty powerful, pretty strong play.
Right. For other types of enrichment.
But but the legitimate thing is that the thing that you point out is exactly true, which is if you don't know who the person is, it's a little harder. We also all kind of have to get ready for that as GDPR and CCPA get ready to impact all of marketing. And Google asks, what is our post third-party cookie strategy? The idea that we can know who people are, and we know that was Bob at Megacorp. We may have to get better and more creative as marketers in all ways as GDPR and CCPA sort of influence the way the rest of the world thinks about cookies and tracking.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find that a lot of these SDRs and BDRs are turning to ad platforms such as LinkedIn, where you can target company employees in a specific location, or are there other marketing channels that seem to be working well in tandem with the intent data that you provide?
Certainly LinkedIn is awesome for audience building, right? Because you can, and that's actually the right way to do it, because yes, you can try to figure out exactly who it was, and you should, but knowing that company has an interest in you and knowing that buying is a group sport, using that intent data to build out your ad audience in LinkedIn is a super smart way to do it. I've seen other people doing creative things where they take that audience over to other platforms, such as Instagram, such as Facebook, et cetera, to reach people when they're not in quite such a B2B mindset. So that's one of the more interesting innovations I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm. And if we were to presume that someone who's on TrustRadius is probably in a fairly late stage of comparing, or at least have narrowed down their decision set, especially if they're coming from a comparison, you versus competitor X. Is it then a smart idea to try to advertise to them with bottom of funnel content like case studies, which are hopefully deal closing type of assets? Or do you see that some of those marketers are still, do the marketing assets change when you've got someone presumably at the bottom of the funnel and have narrowed down their decision set to you and maybe one or two others?
I think the assets do change. I mean, that's marketing 101, right? Is different content throughout the buyer journey, make it stage appropriate. One thing that we see work really well, if somebody is shopping on TrustRadius for software and using us as the authority, I see smart vendors use that in their advertising. So like the ad campaign they'll run across that ABM list will use TrustRadius quotes and TrustRadius stars and branding just to take that third-party authority, that third-party trust, and transfer it over. And that drives a higher response rate because that prospect is already evaluating them repeatedly on TrustRadius. So that branding and that quote is just another trust cue to get them to interact and engage with that ad.
Yeah, that's fascinating and a great idea. It almost, in a sense, kind of sounds like a co-branded remarketing in a way.
It very much is. And it's actually something when I was a customer prior to working at TrustRadius, I used. When I was at TrendKite, we advertised to customers coming up towards renewals. We used Terminus, an ABM platform, to target them. And we knew what product they had switched from. And so we would use competitive quotes that reminded them of that differentiation. So quotes, I chose TrendKite over Meltwater because we'd use quotes focusing on those things in those ABM campaigns. And that was proven to have a very substantial positive impact on retention.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, is there anything, Russ, that I haven't asked you that you wished I would have asked you, or is there anything remaining that you'd like our audience to know?
I've enjoyed the conversation. The core is it's a whole new buyer. We can have the cliche about COVID accelerated digital change, and it did. The buyer's journey went from 67% digital to 100% digital. But even without that, it's a whole new buyer. It's the millennial buyer. It's buying as a team sport. And so you've got to think about what people need and give them what they need to buy.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, I really would love to know a little bit more about your passion for music and the songwriter and the narrative, your love of songwriting and narratives. Can you tell me a little bit about that side of your life?
Yeah, I started playing in bands when I was very young and, started acquiring guitars. You can see I have a handful, and writing songs. I've done everything from sort of rock bands to solo, acoustic singer-songwriter. There's something, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but a songwriter named Slade Cleave said this, and I loved it. The reason he loves songs for narratives is they're like whiskey. There's not room for anything extraneous. It's a story distilled down to its most potent form because you have to get it in 3 verses and choruses, right? Mm-hmm. So that piece of it, I think, is why it appeals to me, because all marketers are storytellers, and it's just an efficient way to tell a story.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I think that is a fantastic analogy and a great way to wrap this up. Russ, it's been a really fantastic pleasure here. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for spending the time with me.
Thank you, Paris.
All right. Another great episode in the books. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get notified when future episodes drop, be sure to subscribe to Paris Talks Marketing on your favorite podcast player. And to learn more about SaaS growth marketing, visit hop.online. That's hop, HOP.online. Have a great day.